I was driving to my son's place when he called from the police station crying, "Dad, please help me. My father-in-law had me arrested." My blood boiled. I turned around and called one person, freeze his assets, and fire every last one of them. He was supposed to be at work. That was the first thing I thought when the county number lit up my phone at 8:47 on a Friday morning, because my son had not missed a Friday in 3 years, and because I was 11 minutes from his driveway with a rebuilt water heater element in a box on the passenger seat. He had asked me on Sunday to come take a look at it. I said I would come Friday. That is the sort of arrangement we make with each other, and the sort we keep, I answered. For a moment there was nothing on the line but the sound of a room with hard floors. Then I heard his voice, and it was not the voice of a 40-year-old operations director. It was the voice of a kid who had been left somewhere. He gave me the facts the way I taught him to give facts. Worst first. 2 detectives had walked him out of the building in handcuffs past his whole floor. The charge was wire fraud, and the complaint had been signed by his own father-in-law. I pulled onto the shoulder and sat there with the hazards ticking while a gravel train I used to own went by in the right lane. Then I made one call. She has run my holding company for 11 years, and she answered on the second ring the way she answers at any hour, which is as if she had been expecting me. I told her what I wanted. Everything his father-in-law could touch, frozen by Monday morning. Everyone who had put a signature to hurting my son, gone by Monday noon. She asked exactly one question. On the record or off? On, I said. All the way on. I heard her pencil start moving before I finished the sentence. Then I drove to the county building. The lobby had fluorescent light and plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and a desk sergeant who counted my cash twice, $100,000, and looked from the bills to my jacket like the two things did not belong to the same man. I sat in one of the bolted chairs for 3 hours. When the steel door finally opened, my son came through it carrying a manila envelope with his belt and his shoelaces in it, holding it out away from his body like it belonged to somebody else. He did not say much in the truck. 20 minutes of road noise. Then, somewhere past the fairgrounds, he said the thing that told me how deep the knife had gone. He said he was not trying to figure out how to beat the charge. He was trying to figure out what he had done to that man. Not legally. Personally. What could make the man want this? I kept my eyes on the road and gave him the first fully true sentence I had said all day. You did not do anything, I told him. This was never about anything you did. I already believed that. What I did not know yet was that I could prove it, and that the proof had been sitting in the county file since 4 minutes past 9 that morning. Sworn, signed, and waiting for somebody to read the whole page. People in this county believe they know exactly 3 things about me. I drive a 14-year-old truck that I bought with cash. I take my coffee black from the same gas station every morning, $1 and change. And the winter the school gym flooded, I was one of the men up on the church roof next door because I was already there with a ladder. All 3 things are true. They are also the whole of what I have allowed to be true in public, and that has been a project of 31 years. It started with a gravel pit bought at auction in a bad spring from a family whose sons wanted city lives. Gravel taught me the only economics I have ever needed. Buy the thing people need in every kind of year, run it clean, and never be the biggest name in the room. After the pit came a short-haul trucking outfit. After the trucks came storage yards along the interstate, then a freight brokerage, then a dozen other businesses so unglamorous that describing them can end a conversation, which I consider one of their finest features. All of it folded, piece by piece, into a holding company with a name so gray you forget it while you are still reading it. 2 rooms above a title office, no sign on the door worth photographing. I have exactly 2 rules that matter, and I have kept both longer than most marriages last. The first is that I read everything twice, every page, both times, no matter how long the document or how late the hour. The second follows from the first. I sign almost nothing. In 31 years, I have put my full name on company paper 11 times. I can tell you what each of those 11 documents says because I read all of them the way other men read a diagnosis. She came to me 11 years ago, the week her bank folded out from under her. In the interview, I slid a 40-page purchase agreement across the desk and asked what she thought of it. She took it home. She came back the next morning having found the clause my own lawyer had missed, and she pointed at it with a pencil, and I hired her before she finished the sentence. She writes everything in pencil to this day. She has never once asked me to repeat an instruction. Besides her, only one other person ever saw the whole picture, and that was my wife. She has been gone 6 years now. Her handwriting is still on the freezer labels downstairs, and I have not been able to make myself rewrite them. She used to say that the only money worth having is the kind you never have to mention. She would have understood what happened this year about 3 days before I did, and she would have been kind enough to let me catch up. Well, my son learned work in the gravel pit, summers, starting at 15. I put him in the scale house writing weight tickets, because the scale house is where you learn the one lesson that holds up everywhere. Weight does not lie, and neither should the man recording it. He took to it. He took to all of it, and then he did the thing I respected most, which is that he left. State school, a logistics degree, and a coordinator job 2 states away with a company that had never heard of me. That last part was his idea before it was ever mine. He wanted the job on his own name, so that is what he did. And for 3 years running, he has been the first one through that building's door in the morning. The overnight cleaning crew knew which button he hit on the vending machine. That is the kind of first one in he was. He met her there at the company holiday party 6 months into the job. She was running the charity raffle, and he watched her quietly pay the difference out of her own purse so that a warehouse kid's ticket would win the good prize. He called me that Sunday and talked for 40 minutes and never once said her name without smiling. I could hear it. You can hear a smile on a phone if you raise the person doing the smiling. She happened to be the owner's daughter. My son did the arithmetic on what that would look like and then outworked the arithmetic. They married 6 years ago at a country club with an ice sculpture, and that wedding was the only time I ever properly met his father-in-law. The handshake lasted maybe a second and a half. Soft hand, eyes already moving past my shoulder, hunting the room for somebody more useful. He asked what I did. I told him I was retired, which was a word for it. He said, "Must be nice," and turned away, and that was the entire acquaintance. Then came the toast. He stood up with a glass of champagne he had not paid enough attention to, and he told that ballroom, in this family takes care of family. The room applauded. My son squeezed my shoulder, and I want this on the record, because I have promised myself to tell this whole thing straight. I applauded too. I clapped for it. After the wedding, the deal my son had made with himself only hardened. Nobody at that company would ever hear my name from him. He introduced me around that night as a retired gravel man, which had the advantage of being true and the greater advantage of ending conversations. He rose on his own clock. Dispatcher, then operations manager, then, 3 years ago, operations director. Every Sunday evening he called me from his own driveway, and he always finished the call before the porch light came on, because that was the ritual. Keep the two lives one driveway apart. In all those years, he asked me for exactly nothing. When they bought the house, I offered to cover the down payment. Once, quietly, he thanked me, declined, and took a 15-year mortgage instead. I hung up the phone that night, prouder than I have ever been of any dollar I made. What happened on that floor Friday morning I have pieced together from 3 people: my son, his wife, and a junior scheduler who typed the whole thing out to my son's wife that night in messages that read like a witness statement, because that is what they were. At 8:12 a.m., 2 detectives stepped off the elevators with a woman from Human Resources walking behind them, holding a folder in front of her chest like a shield. The floor went quiet in stages, the way water goes still, from the edges inward. They crossed 40 desks to reach his office. He stood up when they came in. He was still holding a printout of the weekend load board. The complaint they were acting on said that $412,000 had left the company's operating accounts over the previous 4 months. 41 transfers, every one of them authorized under my son's login, most of them time-stamped after 7 in the evening, when he was usually the only one left in the building. Read that again the way I eventually had to. The frame did not need to invent his hours. It only needed to borrow them. 3 years of first in, last out, converted in 41 entries into the profile of a thief. They cuffed him with his badge still clipped to his shirt pocket. Then they walked him back across those 40 desks, past 40 co-workers, most of whom he had hired, trained, or covered a shift for, and not one of whom could look at him, and he understood that, and hated that he understood it. His father-in-law was standing by the elevators. He did not step forward. He did not speak. He stood with his hands folded in front of him like a man at a graveside, and he watched. The scheduler wrote that the whole floor read that silence as grief, that it looked like a man watching his family come apart in a public place and holding himself together by the buttons. My son read it the same way. From the back seat of the unmarked car, he found the man's eyes through the glass doors, and he mistook what he saw there for heartbreak. He told me later that this was the only moment of the entire morning when he cried, and that he was not crying for himself. He was crying for him. I ask you to sit with that the way I have had to sit with it. One more fact belongs here, though I did not learn it until the following week. At 9:04 that morning, while my son was standing against a height chart having his photograph taken, his father-in-law sat in a small room down the same hallway, swearing out the formal complaint. A detective slid the pages across the table one at a time. He initialed where the man pointed. He signed the last page. He was home before 10. My son was booked at 9:31. To understand what I did over that weekend, you have to know what I had already done 2 years earlier, quietly, and why. It started with a Sunday call like any other. Somewhere in the middle of it, my son mentioned, laughing, that payroll had landed 4 days late, and the office manager had blamed a banking glitch. He laughed it off. I did not. 2 Sundays later, he mentioned, not laughing, that a fuel vendor had held 3 loads over the weekend until an invoice cleared. I have spent my life in and around freight. A late paycheck is a glitch. A fuel vendor holding loads is a diagnosis. So I pulled the thread carefully through people who owed me discretion. What I found was a company about 90 days from collapse. Fuel hedges underwater from a bet the owner had made against the advice of his own controller. Payroll riding on a revolving line that was nearly topped out. 2 banks that had stopped returning his calls in the way banks do when they have already written their memo. And standing directly on top of that sinkhole, my son's whole life. The job, the marriage, the mortgage, the version of himself he had built with his own name. An investment group with a name engineered to be forgotten bought 60% of that company 5 weeks later. The rescue money cleared in one wire. The shareholder agreement ran 38 pages, and on page 19 sat the control provisions, plain as a fence post if you bothered to walk out and look at it. The majority holder could, on written notice, freeze all disbursements and remove any officer or employee for cause. Nobody negotiated that page. Nobody argued a comma of it. Nobody read it. My son's father-in-law father-in-law signed everything without reading past the first page. He took the wire, had the announcement framed, hung it in the lobby where visitors wait, and told the trade press it was his comeback. His comeback. My money, his comeback. And I let him keep the word because the word was not what I was there to protect. My name was off every page on purpose. She signed for the group. That was the entire architecture of it. My son never knew either, and that was the part I enforced most carefully because I had made a rule the day he took that job, and I will state the rule exactly. His name, his work, his win. I was not going to be the invisible hand under his career. I would only move if the walls started falling on him. For 2 years, I kept the rule. I read the quarterly packages, all of them, twice, and the company healed the way patched companies do, slowly and with scar tissue. The last package I saw closed out the month before the first of those 41 transfers. Whatever he built it in the gap between reports, which tells you he understood exactly when the light swept past and how long the dark lasted. My son was asleep by 9 that night, in his old room with the door cracked the exact width he used to crack it when he was 9 years old and wanted the hall light without admitting he wanted it. Grown men returned to old settings under load. I stood in that hallway for a minute longer than I needed to. Then I went down to the kitchen table and laid out 2 documents side by side. The first was the complaint. His defense attorney had sent a copy over that evening. Finding her had taken me 3 phone calls. A woman 2 counties over who had spent 9 years prosecuting financial fraud before she switched tables, which meant she knew the machine from inside the machine. On the phone, she asked exactly 4 questions, all of them about timestamps, none of them about money, and then she said she would take it. I liked her before the second question. The second document was my file copy of the shareholder agreement. It bears her signature, not mine, and by her, I mean the woman who runs my holding company, because that was the entire idea from the beginning. The group owns, she signs, I do not exist. For 2 years, that page had been a fence I built and never once leaned on. At 11:05 p.m., I called her. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the pencil against the legal pad before I got through the first sentence. We built Monday in 19 minutes. Written notice would go out that night under the control provisions, time-stamped and delivered the way the agreement required. Emergency session by phone at 7 Monday morning. Freeze on every disbursement at 9, pending a formal fraud review. Personnel actions by noon. She read it all back to me once, in order, and then she asked her one question of the night. How far down do you want this to go? All the way down, I said. Anyone whose name is on the paperwork that put him in a cell. There was a pause on the line, and then the pencil again. I did not go to bed. 68 years old, and I sat in a kitchen chair until the window over the sink went from black to gray, reading a 38-page agreement I already knew by heart, twice more, because that is what my hands know how to do with fear. Handed a document. At 6, my son came downstairs and found me there. Same chair, same clothes, coffee gone cold at my elbow, a legal pad of my own filled edge to edge. He stood in the doorway and asked what all of this was. I told him to eat something. I told him that the weekend was his to get through, and that Monday belonged to me. He looked at me for a long moment, too tired to take the question any further, and he believed me the way you believe things at 6 in the morning, because the alternative takes energy you do not have. His wife arrived Saturday morning with a suitcase and her jaw set. She had read the complaint at her own kitchen table the night before, every page, and packed before she finished the last one. I want that noted, and I want it noted precisely. She reads everything. In that family, she was the only one who ever did. She put the suitcase down in my front hall, looked at me directly, and asked the question straight, the way her husband would have. Did I believe her father had done this? I told her the truth I had, that I had met the man exactly twice, and that both times he had been performing. She took that in, and she nodded once, slowly, like a juror. Then she and my son went out to the porch, and they stayed out there for 2 hours, and I stayed inside with the dishes and the window. Some conversations a father should hear only the shape of through the glass. Her hands moved. His did not. Near the end, she put her forehead against his shoulder, and whatever was said to get them to that posture is theirs and stays theirs. Sunday, my son mowed my lawn without being asked. Twice over, cross-hatched, lines like a ball field. A man will keep his hands busy in the places his head cannot afford to go. I let him. I trimmed the hedge I trimmed 3 weeks before. Monday morning went off like a train schedule. At 7 a.m., she convened the session by phone and ran it in 11 minutes. The votes were arithmetic. 60% does not debate. It counts. At 9 a.m., sharp, every account within his father-in-law's reach was frozen pending the fraud review. And I am told the first declined card of his morning was the gas station where he filled his car. At noon, the 4 executives who had put their signatures on the internal complaint against my son were walked out through the same lobby, past the same elevators, carrying boxes, their badge access dying behind them with a soft red blink. Same doors, same floor tile. I did not design that symmetry, but I will not pretend it displeased me. The general counsel, a careful man who had apparently read the shareholder agreement for the first time at 6 that morning, sat down with his employer at noon and explained the situation in the voice you use with a man standing too near a ledge. The anonymous majority had voted. The removals were effective. The freeze was lawful, contractual, and total, and as of that hour, he did not control so much as the coffee budget. His father-in-law demanded a name. He wanted to know who was behind the group, who thought they could do this, who. The general general counsel did not give him a name. He handed him instead a fresh copy of the agreement he had signed 2 years earlier with a paperclip set on page 19. The page with the control provisions. The page he had never read. I am told he stared at that paperclip for a very long time. Monday night I sat on my own porch and took inventory, and I am going to be honest about what that hour felt like, because the honesty is the point of telling any of this. My son was free on my cash. The company that had framed him was in my hand, seized in one morning through a page its owner never read. The 4 men who had signed the paperwork against him were home by then, explaining boxes to their wives. The man himself could not buy gasoline on his own card. Every promise I had growled into a phone on the shoulder of the highway Friday morning had been kept, early and in full. It felt finished. I am 68 years old. I have buried a wife and outlasted 3 recessions. I know better than almost anyone alive that finished is a feeling and not a fact, and I sat in that porch chair and let myself feel it anyway. For about 6 hours, I believed we had won. Out on the lawn, in the last of the light, his wife stood with her phone to her ear, calling her father for the first time since Friday. She told him she had read every word of the complaint and did not believe one line of it. Then she stood there through a long silence, and she told me afterward that the silence was its own answer, because she had spent 34 years learning that man's pauses, and this one had no grief in it at all, only calculation. She hung up first. Tuesday at 9, we sat in the defense attorney's conference room, 2 counties over, and she took my 6 hours of victory apart with a stapler and 3 documents. The state, she said, does not care who owns the building. A board vote does not erase a paper trail, and the paper trail, as it stood, still said 3 things in a clear, steady voice: his login, his hours, his name. 41 transfers do not untransfer because the complainant lost his company. The charges had a life of their own now, a case number, a prosecutor, a calendar. Then she wrote the arithmetic on her legal pad and turned it around so we could read it facing us. The counts, the exposure, which on paper is measured in decades, the percentage of people who take a plea, and the reason they take it, which is that a trial is a cliff dive performed in front of your family. She said that innocent men sign those deals every week in this state, and that they sign them for rational reasons, and that rational is the most dangerous word in a courthouse. I asked her, plainly, what my resources changed. She held my eyes for a moment, and then she gave me the sentence I have thought about every day since. Your money bought that company over a weekend, she said. It cannot buy the verdict. The verdict is not for sale to either side. That is the entire point of it. We had won everything except the only thing that mattered. We drove home from her office in silence, and his wife had dinner on the table that nobody managed to eat. And at 10 that night, my son came out to the porch where I was sitting in the dark and asked me the question I had been waiting 3 days for him to ask. He had built his own clock by then, of course. He is my son. He stood against the rail with his arms crossed and said that companies do not get seized over a weekend for strangers, that boards do not convene at 7 in the morning out of civic feeling, and that nobody promises Monday on a Friday unless he is already holding the pen. Then he asked it straight. How do you freeze a company you do not own, Dad? You do not, I said. So I told him. All of it. The late paycheck he had laughed off 2 years ago, and the fuel vendor he had not. The 90 days. The group with the forgettable name. The 60%. Her signature set on every page precisely so that mine would appear on none. The provisions his father-in-law had never read, waiting all that time like a spare key under a rock. 2 years of quarterly packages read twice under this same porch light, while he thought his old man was dozing over crossword puzzles. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long while, long enough that I could hear the highway 2 miles off, and when he finally spoke, he did not ask why, and he did not ask how much. He asked the only question that could have kept me up at night. Did you ever touch it? He said. My reviews, my promotions, the title. Did your thumb ever once land on my scale? Never, I told him. Not a raise, not a review, not a word in anybody's ear. I bought the floor you were standing on, and then I never looked down through it. Everything you climbed, you climbed. He watched me say it the way he used to watch loads come off the scale at 15, checking the weight against the ticket. Then he nodded, once at the yard instead of at me, which is a thing his mother used to do when something was settled, and my chest did what it always does when I catch her moving around inside him. I wish I could end the night there. I cannot, because I have promised to tell this thing straight, and the straight of it is this. At midnight, alone in the kitchen, I had his father-in-law's number up on my phone and my thumb over the call button. I have carried that number since the wedding and used it never. Every instinct I own was talking at once. The man was leveraged, cornered, and for sale. I have spent 40 years learning the exact sound of that condition. I could offer him his company back against one signed page recanting the complaint, and he would take the deal before I finished describing it. I could buy my son's freedom by Tuesday lunch. I called her instead. The defense attorney, 11:52 p.m., and she listened to the whole ugly shape of it without making a sound. Then she took it apart. A bought recantation, she said, is worth less than nothing. It hands the prosecutor a gift-wrapped theory that your family tampers with witnesses, and it converts your money from a resource into an exhibit. You would be building your son's cell and paying the contractor a premium. She let that sit on the line for a moment. Then she said the sentence that finally turned us toward the only door that was ever going to open. The truth in this case is not for sale, she said. said, which is inconvenient because it means we are going to have to go find where it is filed. I deleted the number. I sat in that kitchen until the window grayed, and in the morning we went back to her office and we started with the file. So we stopped fighting the evidence and started reading it. That was her phrase, and she said it the way a surgeon says we are going in. She told us that she builds every case the same way she built them when she was on the other side of the courtroom, as a clock. Lay out every event with a time on it, in order, no gaps papered over, and then walk the dial until you find the minute that does not fit. Juries forgive almost anything, she said, except a clock that will not run forward. Tuesday afternoon, her conference table disappeared under the case file. Exhibits tabbed in 3 colors. Her assistant taped butcher paper across an entire wall and stood there with a marker while she called out entries and times, and the clock of my son's ruin went up in black ink, line by line. The first transfer, 18 weeks before the arrest, a Tuesday, 7:41 p.m. under his login. The last one, 11 days before, a Thursday, 7 to 19 p.m. 41 entries between them, patient as drip irrigation. Then the complaint, sworn Friday at 9:04 a.m. Then the booking sheet, which stamped my son in at 9:31. She stepped back and looked at the wall for a long moment, and I watched her eyes travel the whole dial twice, and I did not yet understand what she was hunting. Then she sat down and pulled the complaint itself out of its folder, and she read it again. From the top, at the pace, you read a contract you intend to sign. I know that pace. I have used it 11 times. At paragraph 2, she stopped. She read the paragraph once, silently. Then she read it out loud, slowly, so the room could hear the shape of it. The complainant states that losses to the company total $412,000, not approximately $400,000, not an amount estimated pending review, not a range, not a floor, not a rough figure offered by a frightened owner who suspects the worst, a closed number, a confident number, a counted number, exact to the dollar, sworn under oath at 9:04 on a Friday morning by a man with his hand on a detective's pen. She set the page down on the table and squared it to the edge with 2 fingers, the way you straighten something you intend to come back to. Then she looked up at the butcher paper wall, at the long black clock of it, and she asked the room the only question that mattered. Who counted? Here is where owning the company stopped being revenge and started being evidence. Because the company was mine, its records opened to us the same afternoon. No subpoena, no waiting, no lawyers guarding the filing room. She sent over a list of what she wanted, and my side had it pulled, copied, and certified by people whose paychecks now cleared through us. The forensic firm's engagement letter came first, dated Saturday, signed at 2:15 in the afternoon, because the woman had ordered a full fraud review a day and a half before the freeze ever landed, quietly building the record while the rest of us were watching a man mow a lawn. The auditors had worked through the weekend. Their first complete reconciliation of the operating accounts finished Monday at 11:40 p.m., and the cover memo stated the total of the unauthorized transfers at $412,000 eaters to the cent, then the bank. Its daily activity logs showed no reconciliation request on Friday, none Thursday, none that week. The relationship officer confirmed it in writing. Nobody from the company had asked for so much as a balance letter in the 9 days before the arrest. Then the controller, a nervous, decent man who now answered to us and seemed relieved by it. He told us that on Friday morning there was no number. He had spent that entire day trying to build one after the arrest hit the floor, with 2 clerks and every statement he could print, and by 5 o'clock his best estimate was somewhere between $300,000 and $5. A guess with a $100,000 wobble in it from the one man in the building whose actual job was counting. Last came the detective's own report, which she obtained through channels she described only as former colleagues. It recorded that the complainant had arrived at the station at 8:05 that Friday morning, before his own office opened, carrying a folder. It recorded that he supplied the loss figure himself, unprompted, before a single question had been asked of him. She took 2 pages and laid them side by side in the middle of that long table. On the left, the complaint, sworn at 9:04 on Friday morning, stating the losses at $412,000 exact. On the right, the audit memo, time-stamped at 11:40 on Monday night, the first moment any accounting professional on this earth arrived at that figure, 3 days apart. And between those 2 pages, in every log, ledger, statement, and drawer we could open with the full power of ownership. Nothing. No count, no total, no number. She looked at the 2 pages for a while, the way you look at a clock that has finally agreed to run. Then she raised her eyes to me, and she did not say anything at all, because she could see that I had already arrived. Here is why that number ended him. On Friday morning, the figure $412,000 did not exist. Not in any ledger the company kept, not in any log the bank ran, not in any file the detectives held, because their file began that morning with a folder a complainant carried in under his arm. Not in any drawer, screen, or scrap of paper my son could reach, and he could reach almost all of them. The audit that would eventually produce that figure had not been hired yet. The controller, whose entire profession was counting, spent a full day with 2 clerks and a calculator, and could not get within $100,000 of it, and still it sat there in paragraph 2, sworn, exact, confident, 3 days early. A stolen total is not something a victim estimates. It is something a thief keeps, the way a man keeps a running tally of anything he is feeding one piece at a time, because he needs to know how deep the hole is and how much longer the lie has to hold. There was one way, and only one way, to know that figure before anyone on earth had counted it, and it was not from watching my son. That number only comes from the man who moved the money himself. He had sworn his own confession into the accusation. He carried the crime into the station in a folder, dressed as an injury, and a detective fed him the pages one by one, and he put his name to it. His signature sits at the bottom of that page, directly under the number that convicts him, applied where the detective pointed, the way he applied it to everything. He never did read past the first page of anything in his life, but he always signed. I sat in that conference room and thought about my own 11 signatures. 31 years, every page read twice before the pen ever came out of my pocket. He could not manage it once, not even for the lie that was supposed to save him. Wednesday morning at 9, she walked into the prosecutor's office carrying 4 documents: the sworn complaint, the audit memo, the bank's letter, and the controller's signed statement. She was in there for 50 minutes and never raised her voice because she never needs to. She simply rebuilt the clock on the man's desk piece by piece and then sat back and let him listen to it tick. A prosecutor can argue with a witness. He cannot argue with a calendar. By the middle of that afternoon, every charge against my son was dismissed. The paperwork used the phrase "in the interest of justice," which is the courthouse way of saying we have seen the clock too. And the detectives, the same two, had a new file open before the old one was cold. The folder he had carried into the station that Friday morning was relabeled into it. Evidence now of authorship. Thursday, the money surfaced, and it surfaced fast because we owned every record it had ever touched. The 41 transfers had gone out dressed as payments to a vendor that turned out to have a mailbox, a logo, and nothing else. From that shell, the money moved once more into a personal account that had been opened in his name 25 months earlier, the same month my buyout closed, and here is where it stopped being a mystery and became merely a man. The rescue had saved his company, but it had never touched his personal guarantees, the ones he had signed across 2 decades of borrowing against himself to look the part. Of course he had signed them. They came due one by one, quiet as termites, and he went back to the only well he still had keys to. And when the well began to show, he did not confess. He looked out across that floor for a place to put the blame, and he chose the man whose hours made the lie cheap, the one who was always there after 7, whose login never slept, the one who had married his daughter and never once asked him for anything, which I believe, to a man like that, is its own kind of insult. Thursday morning at 9:40, the same 2 detectives came back through that lobby, and this time they walked his father-in-law out in cuffs, past the same 40 people, standing in the same stunned quiet, doing the same arithmetic in reverse, past the framed announcement on the lobby wall, the trophy of the deal that had been mine the entire time. Somebody had watered the ficus by the door that morning. The world does not stop for anyone. My son's wife did not come to watch. She said she had already seen everything she needed to in paragraph 2. Thursday morning was cold enough to see your breath. My son and I stood on the sidewalk across the street from the building, coffee from the gas station going lukewarm in our hands, and waited. The woman had called me at 8. She had one item. The operations director position was open, and what did I want done with it? I told her to ask the operations director. It is his call. It has been his call all along. The only thing that ever changed was how much of the board I had to buy to keep it that way. She laughed. One short note, which from her is a standing ovation, and hung up to make the offer. At 9:40, the doors opened. He came out between the 2 detectives with his hands behind him, and he was smaller in every way than the man in that framed announcement upstairs. No statement, no struggle. At the curb, he stopped for half a second and looked back up at the building, at the glass and the name on it, the way a man looks at something that belongs to someone else, because it does. 6 years ago, in a ballroom with an ice sculpture, that man stood up, raised a glass of champagne, and told a ballroom full of people that in this family takes care of family, and the room stood up and clapped. I clapped. It turns out he was telling the truth that night, more truth than he ever told again. One of us meant it. The car door shut on him with that soft, municipal thump, and the sound seemed to release something in my son that had been wound tight since Friday morning. He let a long breath go. He did not cheer, and he did not cry. He just watched the car pull out into traffic like any other car, and then he turned and looked up at the building, to the row of windows where his own office sat with the lights off, waiting for Monday. He asked how long I had owned the place. Long enough, I said.